Do you guys have any good Tojo Yamamoto stories? Here in Alabama, he is still talked about quite a bit. My roommate says his uncle did security at the Boutwell Auditorium and says Tojo was out of the ring and my uncle stopped a woman from trying to hit him in the head with a steel chair as hard as she could. The guy was hated.
Oh, well, and see, that's the thing. He was such a hot heel in the territory that later on, finally, when Jarrett switched him babyface, it was from that point on, although he switched back heel a couple of times because after you're in the same weekly territory for so long, blah, blah, blah. But still, he was an icon after that, and the people never really wanted to hate him that bad again. But no, his first run, he had tons of heat. He would do heel shit like, and this was back in the days where, maybe they were in some of the smaller buildings on some occasions, but he would take a fucking toothpick out of his tights and show it to the fans, and then he'd get a wrist lock on the guy, and behind the referee's back, he'd be sticking the toothpick under the guy's fingernail. And a guy'd be screaming his head off selling it and shit like that, just dirty shit. And the Oriental salt ceremony and the fucking wooden shoes over the fucking head. And, he actually, and Tojo, by the way, had actually worked on top in my book, Tuesday Night at the Gardens. There's a clipping as P.Y. Chung in the Carolinas. He was such a hot heel that he got a main event at the Charlotte Memorial Stadium on a summer show outdoors against Buddy Rogers for the NWA title. And a lot of people don't know that side of Tojo, that he ever worked in that prominent of a spot, especially as a single, but early in his career he did. Anyway, once he switched babyface, it was fucking golden because the chops were over, the heels flew for him. He had that sneaky, fucking devious facial expressions that that drove people crazy, and he had that body language where he'd sneak up on somebody. So when he was a heel and he was sneaking up on them to get heat, he'd rip their eyes, or when he was sneaking up as a baby face, he'd chop the heel. All the heels had to do was work with him like he was Superman, and he was over like God. And it was visually almost implausible because he was 5'5" and maybe weighed 200 pounds, and they said 230 because he was shaped like Buddha. But he got over so strong for 10 years all over the South as a heel that finally, then, and he helped train Jerry Jarrett, and he helped train Tommy Rich, and he helped train Bobby Eaton. And, and all the guys that came through Tennessee at that point, the young guys, they'd get put with Tojo. And so when he became the babyface, he was an icon. And for, most of the decade, it was big wrestling star, Fargo, Tojo, Jarrett. And then later on, Lawler, Fargo, Jarrett. Or Lawler, Tojo, Jarrett when Fargo retired.
Of course, he was P.Y. Chung, and later on, in the late 80s, when he would manage Phil Hickerson went Japanese and became P.Y. Chuhai.
He was turning Japanese. We really think so.
A nice little throwback to P.Y. Chung, if you really think about it.
Yeah, well, it was an homage, as they say.